ALEATORY podcast.
I want you to just sit quietly for a moment. Just observe the physical space around you.
Yeah, really look at it. Take a second.
Exactly. Look closely at the walls framing your room. Look at the grain of the wood on your desk or, the glass in your windows, the metallic frame of the chair you're sitting in.
Right.
We navigate our entire lives operating under this very quiet, very profound assumption of trust regarding these materials.
It is a baseline. We have this ingrained, almost biological certainty that inanimate objects are precisely that, inanimate. Dead matter.
Right, dead matter. We assume that a carved piece of wood on a wall is simply an aesthetic choice, right? A decorative manipulation of natural fibers.
Can we assume the structural skeleton of a building, like the steel and the concrete, is there solely to defy gravity, to shelter us from the weather?
Yeah, it is a foundational psychological baseline. If a stray animal wanders through a public park, you perceive it simply as a creature driven by instinct.
A bird on a windowsill, a cat in the grass.
Exactly. These are entities participating in the natural world, completely disconnected from human conflict, disconnected from advanced technology or the invisible machinery of geopolitics.
Our sanity actually relies heavily on this compartmentalization. We have the natural world, we have the built environment, and we have human intent.
And we desperately want those boundaries to remain fixed. We need them to be fixed.
But I want you to imagine the psychological terror of waking up in a reality where those boundaries have been quietly erased.
Oh, man. What happens to the human psyche when that foundational trust in the physical environment is just completely shattered?
Imagine a scenario where the silent, dead objects in your private sanctuary are suddenly granted the ability to observe.
Where the natural world is suddenly grafted onto the mechanical. You are sitting alone, speaking quietly to a confidant, and slowly the realization dawns on you.
That the air vibrating in your throat is not just dissipating into the room.
It is being captured, it is being harvested and weaponized against you.
It creates a landscape of absolute suffocating paranoia. When you study the extremes of human ingenuity, particularly when that ingenuity is driven by sheer, unadulterated existential fear, you start to realize something terrifying.
That the definition of a weapon can expand to encompass literally anything.
Literally anything. The assumption that your private space is secure is a luxury of a peaceful mind. But when the stakes are elevated to the level of total annihilation.
Right, when the wrong move or a leaked secret means the destruction of entire civilizations.
Exactly. The walls around you are no longer just walls. They become an active, hostile part of a battlefield.
You start to question the fundamental reality of your surroundings. You have to ask yourself, is this object real, or is it an illusion hiding a multi-million-dollar instrument of observation?
The world transforms into a waking nightmare. A gift from a friend, the foundation of your home, or the wildlife outside your window. They're all conscripted with the exact same invisible, desperate war.
You are forced to ask profound questions about the nature of observation itself. Like, how do you defend against an adversary who does not simply infiltrate your physical space, but literally becomes the physical space you inhabit?
You cannot just lock the door.
Yeah.
You cannot just close the blinds. The threat is woven into the very fabric of the environment.
And the historical reality of this concept, the sheer mechanical brilliance and the staggering arrogance required to blur those lines between the natural, the architectural, and the technological.
It is perhaps one of the most chilling testaments to what human beings are capable of when they are terrified of the dark.
Welcome to the episode. Together we turn knowledge into real results.
To truly grasp the scale of what we are analyzing today, we have to completely discard our modern preconceptions. We live in an era of microchips, ubiquitous digital connectivity.
Right. We assume surveillance looks like a glowing screen or a piece of software.
But we need to step back to an era where surveillance was an art form carved out of raw physics and raw desperation.
So I am taking us to August of 1945. Picture the atmosphere. The most destructive global conflict in human history is in its final, agonizing weeks.
World War II is basically ending.
Exactly. The United States and the Soviet Union are technically still allies, but the geopolitical tectonic plates are already shifting. The ice of the Cold War is rapidly forming over that relationship.
It is incredibly tense.
It is. We are in Moscow, inside the residential study of the American ambassador W. Avril Harriman. This residence is known as Spaso House. It's a grand, neoclassical mansion.
Highly secure.
Highly secure, highly sensitive. And into this environment, the Soviets send a delegation of school children.
Yeah, wait. The psychology of this delivery method cannot be overstated. You send children.
It is brilliant.
It is. You invoke the shared sacrifice of the horrific war that is just ending. You frame the interaction not as statecraft, but as a pure gesture of innocence, friendship, and camaraderie between two weary nations.
It is an emotional Trojan horse of the highest order. So, the children present Ambassador Harriman with a gift. It is a massive, stunningly crafted, intricately carved wooden plaque of the Great Seal of the United States.
Wow.
The beak of the eagle, the olive branches, the arrows, all of it is detailed beautifully in rich wood. It is an absolute masterpiece of craftsmanship.
And Harriman is deeply moved by this, obviously.
Of course. I mean, to reject the gift or to immediately hand it over to security to have it violently dismantled and x-rayed, that would be a massive, perhaps unforgivable diplomatic insult in that specific, delicate moment in time.
So, human nature overrides protocol.
Which is precisely what the engineers of this operation were banking on. They understood that security is often compromised by etiquette.
That is such a profound point.
The ambassador proudly hangs the Great Seal prominently on the wall of his private study, and for 7 years, through the tenure of multiple ambassadors, including the legendary George Kennan, that symbol of American power hung there. It watched over confidential meetings, strategic briefings, and the absolute most sensitive diplomatic conversations shaping the early atomic age.
And for those entire 7 years, it was transmitting every single spoken word directly to Soviet intelligence.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Let's pump the brakes and rigorously interrogate this. We are talking about the dawn of the atomic age, sure. But we are also talking about the dawn of highly sophisticated counterintelligence.
Right.
The people tasked with securing the American embassy in Moscow were not amateurs. How is it physically, practically possible that American security personnel who swept that room for bugs on a regular basis were fundamentally blind to a listening device for 7 years?
It sounds impossible.
It does. I mean, a standard microphone requires a power source.
Yeah.
It requires batteries. It emits an electromagnetic signature, a hum, a frequency. How does a massive piece of wood sit on a wall for almost a decade without emitting a single trace of its existence to trained professionals?
Because it had no batteries, it had no power cord, it had no active electronic components whatsoever. It was completely dead. Completely. The device hidden inside the beak of the eagle on that wooden plaque was designed by Leon Theremin. This is the same Russian genius, the physicist and musician who invented the electronic musical instrument that bears his name, the Theremin.
Right, the spooky sci-fi instrument.
Yeah, that guy. He designed a device known technically as an endovibrator, or what the Americans eventually simply and terrifyingly called the Thing. It was a passive cavity resonator.
Dual cavity resonator.
Yeah. If you cracked open the wood, you would just find a small, perfectly machined, silver-plated copper cylinder. Inside was a tiny capacitive membrane, completely flush, connected to a small quarter-wavelength antenna. That's it, just metal and a membrane.
I need to clarify the physics of this, because it is almost poetic in its simplicity and its lethality. Because it possessed no power source, it was essentially a piece of inert metal.
Exactly.
If an American technician walked into Spaso House with a standard radio frequency detector or the nonlinear junction detectors of that era, they're looking for electrical current. They're looking for a pulse.
And the device had no pulse. It was as dead as a doorknob. It only came to life when the Soviets wanted it to.
Let me build an analogy to make this mechanical genius perfectly clear, because passive cavity resonator sounds impenetrable to most people.
Please do.
Imagine you place a perfectly tuned acoustic guitar in a completely silent room. That guitar makes no sound on its own. It requires the kinetic energy of someone plucking the strings.
Okay, I follow.
But if you stand outside the room with a massive speaker and play a specific note loudly enough, say a perfect A, the corresponding A string on the guitar inside the room will begin to vibrate sympathetically. It will capture that external energy and resonate.
Oh, wow.
Now, apply that to the Great Seal. Instead of sound waves, the Soviets are beaming electromagnetic energy. The thing acts as an electromagnetic tuning fork, sitting in the dark, waiting for the exact pitch of external energy to make it sing.
That is brilliant. And so when that continuous radio beam penetrated the wall and hit the tiny antenna inside the Great Seal, it energized that copper cavity. It brought the dead metal to life.
It primed it.
Right. Then Ambassador Harriman or Ambassador Kennan would walk into the room and start speaking. The acoustic sound waves of their voices would physically travel through the air, penetrate the very thin wood covering the hollowed-out section of the plaque, and strike that microscopic capacitive membrane inside the metal cylinder.
And this is where the magic happens. As that membrane vibrated back and forth from the physical air pressure of the human voice, It subtly altered the capacitance of the entire metallic cavity.
It literally changed shit.
Yes, it changed the physical dimensions of the space the radio wave was bouncing around inside. That microscopic change in capacitance modulated the radio signal that was reflecting off the device and bouncing back out of the building to the Soviet listening post.
That is unbelievable.
The receiver outside picked up that reflected, altered radio wave, demodulated the variations caused by the membrane, and translated it back into crystal clear audio. They were not listening to a microphone. They were reading the microscopic physical vibrations of the ambassador's voice off a piece of passive metal using radio waves.
It is a breathtaking, terrifying application of physics. The Americans were looking for wires, and the Soviets were using the ambient physics of the room against them.
And the only reason this pristine espionage operation unraveled was due to pure blind accident.
Yeah, fast forward to 1951, a British radio operator sitting at the nearby British embassy is simply scanning the airwaves, monitoring open Soviet Air Force radio channels.
To do his job.
Just doing his job. Suddenly, through the static, he hears something impossible. He hears the unmistakable, crisp English voices of American diplomats having a casual conversation.
Wait, on an open Russian military channel?
Yeah. The Soviets were beaming their illuminating radio wave, but the reflected signal was bleeding over into adjacent frequencies that could be picked up by untuned wideband receivers.
I can only imagine the absolute cold panic that must have gripped the State Department when London called Washington to tell them that their most secure room in the Soviet Union was broadcasting on public airwaves.
Oh, it must have been chaos. You know your sanctuary is compromised, but you have no idea how.
Because remember, the brilliance of the design, the moment the sweep team enters the room and starts tearing things apart, the Soviets across the street see them through the window or hear them enter and simply turn off the illuminating beam.
The device instantly goes completely inert. It goes back to being a dead piece of metal.
Exactly.
The suspense of the hunt reads like a psychological thriller. It takes them almost a full year of paranoia until March of 1952. The State Department sends two absolute counterintelligence experts, Joseph Bizian and John W. Ford, to Moscow.
Heavy hitters.
They realize standard sweeps are useless. The traditional rulebook is garbage. So they have to set a trap to force the Soviets to turn the device on while they are looking for it.
Oh, they had to flesh them out.
Right. They set up an audio feedback loop, a loud, screeching howl using an electronic signal generator and a receiver. Yeah. Then they have Ambassador George Kennan sit in his study and begin dictating a fake, highly classified memo to his secretary.
They are dangling irresistible bait. They know the Soviets are monitoring the room visually or through other means, and the moment they hear Kennan start a classified dictation, they will not be able to resist eliminating the room to capture it.
And the trap works perfectly. The moment the Soviets turn on their external transmitter to listen to the dictation, Bejian and Ford's equipment catches the transmission in real time.
The feedback loop works.
Yes. The screeching feedback howl isolates the exact location of the anomaly. It's coming from the wall. It's coming from the eagle. They tear the Great Seal down, smash it open with a hammer, and find Theremin's masterpiece.
The United States was so humiliated and fascinated by this technology that they kept it a fiercely guarded secret for years. They spent years reverse engineering the passive cavity resonator just to understand how fundamentally outclassed they were in the invisible war.
It wasn't until 1960, during the incredibly tense United Nations Security Council meetings following the shoot-down of the U-2 spy plane, that they revealed it.
The Soviets were loudly and aggressively condemning American espionage on the world stage at that point.
Yeah, so Ambassador Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. decided to play his trump card. He dramatically unveiled the hollowed-out Great Seal bug in front of the entire World Assembly, complete with tweezers pointing to the tiny metal cylinder.
It was a massive theatrical demonstration proving that the invisible war was entirely mutual.
The theatricality at the UN was great for public relations, but internally, within the American intelligence apparatus, the revelation of the Great Seal bug was devastating.
Oh, absolutely. The realization that the Soviets had achieved this level of mastery over inanimate objects, over passive physics, deeply rattled the American scientific community. It created an institutional desperation.
If the Soviets could turn a piece of decorative wood into a flawless, undetectable spy, the Americans felt they could not just catch up. They needed to leapfrog the technology entirely.
And that profound desperation leads us directly to one of the most bizarre, conceptually audacious, and frankly disturbing programs in the history of espionage.
It takes us into the heart of the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. These guys are often referred to as the Wizards of Langley.
The real mad scientists.
Exactly. By the 1960s, these engineers were obsessed with a very specific tactical problem. They needed to eavesdrop on Soviet officials, but not in their offices. They needed to hear them in public spaces.
Park benches, courtyards, plazas.
Places where you couldn't possibly plant a microphone without being seen, and where a passive device wouldn't work because you couldn't park a van nearby to beam radio waves at it.
The physical environment completely dictated the operational requirements here. You need a listening device that is highly mobile. It needs to navigate complex, unpredictable terrain.
It possesses to have flawless natural camouflage.
And most importantly, it cannot trigger the deeply ingrained defensive paranoia of a trained Soviet intelligence officer. If a man in a trench coat walks past a park bench, the Soviet stops talking.
But what wanders around public parks, navigating benches and bushes, entirely ignored by everyone, specifically cats. And this is where the narrative takes a dark, surreal turn from the mastery of physics into the frantic attempt to weaponize biology.
It really does.
The project was codenamed Operation Acoustic Kitty. The core premise was to physically and surgically transform a living, breathing creature into a mobile surveillance platform.
We are not talking about a caller with a microphone, right?
No. We are talking about an hour-long, highly invasive surgery performed on a gray and white female cat. A veterinary surgeon, operating under the highest levels of classification, implanted a 3/4-inch radio transmitter directly at the base of the cat's skull. They routed a microscopic microphone deep inside the ear canal.
Wait, I have to clarify the engineering logic there. They used the ear canal to utilize the cat's natural cochlear filtering.
Really?
Yes. They wanted the cat's living anatomy to act as a directional microphone to filter out ambient street noise.
It is brilliantly terrifying. It is. And they didn't stop there. They implanted a battery pack into the chest cavity and then painstakingly wove a very fine wire antenna all the way down the cat's spine to the tip of its tail.
They turned the animal into a living cyborg.
Exactly.
I had to challenge the foundational logic of this entire endeavor, though, because the sheer audacity requires a heavy dose of extreme skepticism.
Okay.
We're looking at a project that consumed an estimated $20 million
Yeah.
and took 5 years of intensive research and development. How does a room full of brilliant engineers, the best minds in the country, people who intimately understand the bleeding edge of transistor miniaturization and radio frequency propagation, completely ignore the most basic, universally understood tenets of animal psychology?
I want to push back on that judgment just a little.
Yeah.
You have to place yourself in their mindset in the 1960s. They are terrified of nuclear annihilation.
Right.
They have an almost unlimited budget. They see technology solving every other problem, putting men in space, splitting the atom. Is it really that shocking that they believe they could engineer behavioral control? They needed a mobile platform, and robotics at the time were rudimentary. Biology was the only available chassis.
It is shocking because a cat is not a dog. A dog possesses a pack mentality. It inherently seeks approval. It obeys a hierarchy. It wants to please an alpha.
For sure.
A cat is a solitary, territorial predator. It is notoriously independent and entirely indifferent to human commands unless it serves its immediate needs.
You're not wrong about cats.
The idea that you could surgically alter a feline, take it to a park, and successfully order it to go sit near a specific bench and passively listen to 2 specific men without getting distracted is an astonishing display of technological hubris. They looked at a living, complex organism and saw only a fleshy delivery vehicle for a microphone.
Well, the reality of the field tests quickly aligned with your skepticism. They found out almost immediately that the biological reality of the animal rejected the engineering parameters.
Sure.
Right. The cat would wander off, it would get distracted by a bird in the trees, and most problematically, the cat would get hungry. The basic biological imperative of appetite completely overrode $20 million of state-of-the-art electronics. When the cat was hungry, the mission was over.
And observe how the wizards of Langley responded to this biological failure. Did they reconsider the premise? No. The engineering solution to a biological problem is simply more invasive engineering.
They didn't stop.
No. They actually dragged this animal back into the lab and performed additional, deeply invasive surgeries to try and override its natural sense of hunger. They attempted to map and physically manipulate the neural pathways that dictate appetite, effectively trying to erase the line between a living creature and a programmable machine.
Wow.
They were trying to surgically remove the cat from the cat.
It is a profoundly chilling intersection of science and desecration, and it all culminated in a legendary, highly anticipated field test outside a Soviet compound on Wisconsin Avenue in Washington, D.C.
The famous test.
Yes. Now, this is where the historical record shatters, and the narrative splits into two drastically different, highly contested accounts. For decades, the publicly accepted history came from Victor Marchetti, a former CIA officer who became a vocal critic of the agency.
Marchetti's account is deeply cynical and almost darkly comic in a tragic way. It plays perfectly into the narrative of government incompetence.
According to Marchetti, the handlers pull up to Wisconsin Avenue in an unmarked surveillance van. They slide the door open. They release Acoustic Kitty onto the pavement, directing it toward two men sitting on a park bench across the busy street.
Oh.
The cat takes a few steps out of the van, wanders directly into the roadway, and is instantly flattened by a passing taxi.
Oh my God.
$20 million, 5 years of scientific boundary pushing, and the surgical mutilation of an animal, all reduced to roadkill in a matter of seconds. The operatives then supposedly had to scramble out with a bucket to retrieve the highly classified, mangled electronics from the asphalt before the Soviets noticed.
Which is a narrative that perfectly encapsulates the futility, the arrogance, and the moral blindness of the Cold War intelligence apparatus. It is a neat, tidy morality tale about the limits of human control. But history is rarely that neat.
Wait, no, I shouldn't say exactly, because the second account completely upends that narrative. Decades later, in 2013, Robert Wallace, a former director of the CIA's Office of Technical Service, published a profoundly different account.
He disputed the taxi story.
He vehemently disputed the taxi story. According to Wallace, the cat was not killed by a cab at all. The field test simply demonstrated what any sane behavioral scientist would have predicted from day one. The cat just wandered off.
Just walked away.
It ignored its handlers, it couldn't be directed to the target, and the audio it picked up was useless ambient street noise and wind shear. Wallace claimed they eventually retrieved the cat, took it back to the lab, unimplanted all the equipment in a final surgery, and the animal actually went on to live a long, relatively normal life before the project was officially canceled in 1967.
The internal CIA memo, officially closing Operation Acoustic Kitty, is a masterpiece of bureaucratic understatement. It dryly notes that while they proved cats could be mechanically trained to move short distances, the environmental and security factors made it, quote, not practical for intelligence purposes.
Not practical.
But what is vital to understand is that Acoustic Kitty was not an isolated incident. It was not a rogue experiment. It was merely the most famous symptom of a much broader, agency-wide obsession with biological spies. The failure of the cat did not stop the program. It just shifted the focus to different species. If a mammal with complex territorial instincts won't work, what about a bird?
Right. The logic progresses. If you cannot control a predator, you look to species that possess inherent, predictable navigational programming. This leads us directly to the Tucana Project of the 1970s.
Pigeons.
Yes. The CIA turned to homing pigeons. Now, pigeons have an incredible innate biological ability to find their way home across vast, unfamiliar distances, utilizing magnetic fields, olfactory cues, and visual landmarks. The agency's technical service designed tiny, incredibly lightweight chest harnesses equipped with miniature, high-resolution cameras.
The operational concept here is brilliant in its simplicity compared to the cat. You smuggle these birds into a hostile country like the Soviet Union. You release them near a secret military site, perhaps a naval shipyard or a missile silo, and then you rely entirely on the bird's natural boomerang effect.
They just fly home.
Exactly. As the pigeon flies its instinctual route back to a predetermined home roost, a timing mechanism on the camera would rapidly click, taking low-altitude photographs. Because a pigeon flies so low, the imagery could capture details like the serial numbers on equipment details that the early high-altitude spy planes or satellites simply couldn't resolve. Is the weaponization of the homing instinct.
And the creativity or the madness, depending on how you view it, was boundless. They didn't just stop at birds. In the 1990s, the technology evolved into biomimetics. They developed Charlie, a robotic catfish.
Charlie the catfish.
Now, Charlie wasn't a living creature. It was an incredibly sophisticated drone. It had a pressure hull hidden inside its tail, a complex ballast system, and a propulsion mechanism designed to perfectly mimic the exact undulating muscular movement of a real fish.
Wow.
It was designed to swim silently against the tide near enemy naval installations to collect acoustic signals from submarines or gather water samples to test for chemical runoff.
The line between biology and machinery continues to blur. Consider the Insectothopter developed in 1976. This was a micro-drone designed to look and fly exactly like a dragonfly.
A dragonfly drone in 1976.
Yeah. It carried a microscopic listening device and was guided invisibly by a laser beam acting as a data link. The miniaturization engineering was magnificent. It could fly 200 meters in 60 seconds, flapping its wings just like the real insect.
That's incredible.
But once again, the hubris of ignoring the natural environment defeated the engineering. The entire multi-million-dollar operation was rendered completely useless if there was a crosswind of more than 5 miles per hour. The ambient breeze simply blew the surveillance platform off course.
There are also the projects that sound almost mythic, vanishing into the fog of classified history. There was a Raven operative, ironically named Dudo.
Duda.
Ravens are incredibly intelligent problem solvers. Ditto was trained to fly to specific building profiles and deposit heavy listening devices on windowsills. But during a crucial field test in 1974, Dodo simply flew away into the horizon and was never seen again.
Naturally.
You also have the Navy utilizing the precise biological echolocation of bottlenose dolphins to hunt for underwater mines or guard restricted harbor waters against enemy divers.
And I think we need to confront the most grotesque yet brutally practical example of biological espionage, which didn't involve living animals at all. It involved dead ones.
Oh, this one is wild.
During the height of the Cold War, CIA operatives in hostile cities utilized gutted, dead rats as secure dead drops. A dead drop is a location where an operative leaves material for another to pick up later without them ever meeting.
Right.
Operatives would take a rat carcass, hollow it out, hide secret messages, rolls of microfilm, or large sums of money inside, and casually toss it into a predetermined alleyway or a muddy ditch. To a passing counterintelligence officer, it just looks like urban decay.
But even then, biology proved to be an obstacle. To ensure that roaming stray cats or other scavengers wouldn't eat the rat and run off with highly classified intelligence, the CIA scientists had to meticulously douse the dead rats in a mixture of wormwood oil and pepper sauce.
Incredible.
They had to create a chemical deterrent to prevent the natural food chain from interrupting the flow of geopolitical intelligence.
If we pause here and synthesize the trajectory of these operations, a very clear, very desperate pattern emerges. The Americans realized early on that their enemies had mastered the inanimate world, turning the very walls against them with passive resonance devices like the Great Seal Bug.
Yeah, that's true.
In response, the Americans attempted to conquer the biological world. They tried to force living tissue, instinct, and natural behavior to conform to the rigid, predictable rigors of intelligence gathering. But it failed.
Cats wander off to chase mice, ravens fly away to find mates, dragonflies are caught in the summer breeze.
The chaos of the ground-level environment, the messy reality of the biosphere, proved too unpredictable to be reliably weaponized.
Which forces a massive structural pivot in American strategy. If the ground was too chaotic, if the animals were too stubborn, and the physics of the street were too complex, there was only one frontier left where the laws of physics operated with absolute fictionless predictability. The Americans stopped looking at the park benches and they looked up. They looked to the vacuum of space. And this transition leads us directly to the era of a man named Albert Bud Whelan.
Albert Bud Whelan is a towering, transformative figure in this narrative, and he is absolutely essential to understanding the modern intelligence landscape. He was a brilliant physicist, incredibly driven, and famously acerbic.
He had a reputation.
He did not suffer fools, and he had a terrifying intellect. He was hired by CIA Director John McConey in 1962 specifically to take over and lead that same Directorate of Science and Technology we've been discussing. Whelan arrived at Langley with a stark, uncompromising realization.
Which was?
The CIA was rapidly losing ground to the military.
Right.
The Air Force and the Department of Defense were dominating the emerging field of national reconnaissance, and the CIA was in danger of becoming obsolete in the space age.
Whelan knew that to win the intelligence war, the CIA didn't just need better gadgets or more surgical tools, it needed a monopoly on top-tier scientific talent. He aggressively restructured the agency's hiring practices. He fought bureaucratic wars to secure the ability to pay highly competitive private sector wages to lure the absolute greatest engineering minds away from aerospace corporations and universities. He built a brain trust.
A formidable one.
And with that unparalleled intellectual capital, Whelan initiated a triad of revolutionary satellite programs that fundamentally altered the speed, scope, and nature of global espionage forever.
Let's break down that triad, starting with the problem of broad area surveillance. He launched the Hexagon program. We need to understand the physical scale of Hexagon. This was designed to replace the earlier primitive Corona satellites.
Okay.
Hexagon was an absolute leviathan. It was an engineering marvel the size of a school bus, orbiting the Earth and scanning unimaginably massive swaths of Soviet territory. It used incredibly complex optics to expose literally miles of physical photographic film.
But wait, explain the logistics of that, because it sounds insane to modern ears. It's taking pictures on physical film in the vacuum of space. How do they get the pictures back to the president?
That is the crucial bottleneck. Because it was physical film, it couldn't transmit the data electronically like a digital camera. The satellite had to mechanically cut the film, spool it into heavy re-entry capsules, and physically eject those capsules out of the
They
satellite.
drop them from space.
Yes. The capsule would re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, burning up on the outside, deploy a parachute, and then modified military aircraft flying over the Pacific Ocean would have to snag the parachute out of midair using a trapeze hook before it sank into the water.
It is an insanely complex, high-wire logistical chain. But Whelan didn't stop at photography. He realized that the vacuum of space could be used for audio interception, much in the same way the Great Seal Bug captured vibrations.
He was looking at communications.
Yeah, he was reading reports about the new SYNCOM communications satellites, the first satellites placed in geosynchronous orbit. A geosynchronous orbit means the satellite matches the Earth's rotation, so it appears to hover constantly over the exact same spot on the ground.
Right.
Whelan had an epiphany. Why not put a satellite in geosynchronous orbit and use it as a giant, incredibly sensitive microphone? This birthed the Rhyolite program.
The Rhyolite was a conceptual leap. It was designed to intercept the telemetry signals of Soviet ballistic missiles. When a nuclear missile launches, it doesn't just fly blind. It constantly transmits diagnostic data back to its ground control, fuel pressure, engine temperature, stage separation, trajectory.
So they listened to the data.
Exactly.
Right.
If the United States could deploy an antenna the size of a baseball diamond in space, hovering 22,000 miles above the Soviet Union, they could capture that data in real time. They would know the exact payload and capabilities of the enemy's nuclear arsenal before the missiles even reached orbit. They were listening to the machines talk to each other.
But Whelan's most profound conceptual leap, the one that truly changed the world, came during a moment of mundane domesticity. He was simply sitting in his living room on a Sunday, watching a live broadcast of a football game happening on the other side of the country. He realized the television signals were being relayed live, bouncing off a communications satellite, not being physically recorded on film and dropped out of airplanes. He went into Langley and asked his team a revolutionary question.
Which was?
Why are we still dropping buckets of film from space in parachutes? Why can't we transmit photographic imagery from space in real time, just like a live television broadcast of a football game?
I want to stop and force us to grapple with the contradiction here, because the conceptual leap is staggering. We just spent 20 minutes discussing how this exact same Directorate of Science and Technology, these exact same engineers, could not figure out how to stop a domestic cat from chasing a bird in a park in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, that is a wild juxtaposition.
They were baffled by biological hunger. How do those same minds successfully manage the incomprehensible complexity of orbital mechanics, electro-optics, digital encryption, and real-time telemetry from space?
It feels like an impossible paradox. How can you conquer the heavens when you can't conquer a park bench?
It does.
The answer lies in the physics. Space is predictable. Biology is not. The Kennan project, which was born from that football game epiphany, proves the difference between biological chaos and physical certainty.
Right.
The problem with Kennan was that they couldn't use a low Earth orbit satellite to beam a signal directly to the U.S., because when the satellite was over Russia taking the picture, it wouldn't be in a direct line of sight with a receiving station in America. The Earth was literally in the way.
So they had to bounce the signal. Let's use an analogy to clarify the geometry of what they achieved. Imagine you are standing on one side of a massive, perfectly curved brick wall, and you desperately need to see what your enemy is doing on the other side.
Okay.
You cannot look through the wall. But if you place a series of mirrors high up in the air above the wall, angled perfectly, you can reflect the image of the other side up to the mirror, over the wall, and down to your eyes.
I see.
The Kennan relay system functioned exactly like those mirrors. They placed relay satellites in highly elliptical, high-inclination orbits. The low Earth spy satellite took the digital picture over Moscow, beamed the data up to the relay satellite high above the curvature of the Earth, which then beamed it down to a receiving station in Virginia.
And the strategic impact of Kennan cannot be overstated. It fundamentally altered the temporal reality of the Cold War. It changed the speed of intelligence.
Completely.
During the Hexagon days, if the President of the United States wanted to know if the Soviets were massing tanks on a border, he had to wait weeks for the satellite to pass over, eject the film, have a plane catch it, fly it to a lab, develop it, and analyze it.
A massive delay.
With Kennan, the speed of intelligence went from weeks to mere seconds. The Americans had effectively conquered the high frontier. They were looking down from the heavens with unprecedented real-time clarity. They felt they had won the technological high ground.
But here is the devastating, almost cruel irony of the Cold War timeline. While the Americans were gazing down from the stratosphere, pouring billions into orbital mechanics, believing their technological supremacy in space was rendering the Soviet Union transparent, the Soviets were quietly, meticulously, and devastatingly compromising the very ground the Americans were standing on.
Yeah, they were.
While the U.S. focused on the vacuum of space, the Soviets focused on the architecture of the American office space.
We have to pull our focus down from the triumph of the stars and return to the brutal, claustrophobic, paranoid reality of Moscow. Because the Soviets had not stopped innovating since they planted the Great Seal Bug. In fact, they had elevated their electromechanical espionage to a terrifying new level of sophistication.
This brings us to Project GNMA.
Yes, an operation that ran completely undetected for nearly a decade, roughly from 1976 to 1984.
The target this time was not a wooden plaque. It was the absolute workhorse of the American bureaucratic machine, the IBM Selectric typewriter. Every sensitive memo, every classified intelligence report, every cryptographic key, and every diplomatic cable generated inside the U.S. Embassy in Moscow and the consulate in Leningrad was typed on these machines.
Everything went through them.
The strategic logic is flawless. If you can compromise the typewriter itself, you don't need to try and break the unbreakable cryptographic codes transmitting the message. You capture the plaintext right at the source before it is ever encrypted.
And the method of compromise is an absolute masterpiece. The Soviets successfully intercepted shipments and bugged 16 specific IBM Selectric typewriters. They didn't just hollow out a space and hide a microphone with a battery.
It went much deeper.
They fundamentally altered the core mechanical structure of the machine itself. They hid the surveillance equipment inside a modified comb support bar, which is a solid integral metal component of the typewriter's chassis.
Let me break down the mechanics of this because it is a masterclass in electromechanical engineering. The Selectric typewriter doesn't use individual type bars. It uses a rotating golf ball typing element.
Right, those on the metal balls.
It works through an incredibly complex kinetic dance of levers and metallic bars called bales. The Soviets painstakingly replace 6 ferromagnetic, meaning magnetizable bales within the typewriter, with non-ferromagnetic bales that had highly magnetized tips.
Okay, so they mixed magnetic and non-magnetic parts.
Yes. As the typist struck a specific key, the kinetic movement of those magnetic tips passing over the modified comb support bar generated a microscopic electrical variance. The bug hidden inside the bar measured the specific time intervals and magnetic fluctuations of those keystrokes, translating the mechanical physical movement of typing into digital binary data.
It was, for all intents and purposes, the world's first hardware keylogger, operating years before the digital revolution made such things commonplace.
Incredible foresight.
But capturing the keystrokes is only half the battle. How do you get the data out of the embassy without the Americans noticing the transmission? The Americans were sweeping the building constantly with highly sensitive frequency analyzers.
The transmission method is perhaps the most devious part of the entire operation. The device didn't broadcast a constant, loud radio signal that could be easily swept and located. It stored a small buffer of data and transmitted it in microscopic, high-frequency, incredibly brief radio bursts.
Like little blips.
Exactly.
Oh.
And they utilized a technique called snuggling. To evade the American sweeps, the Soviets programmed the typewriter bugs to transmit their data bursts on the exact same frequencies as the ambient, noisy radio and television stations broadcasting locally in Moscow.
That is so clever.
They snuggled their intelligence data right into the static of public broadcasting. When an American technician swept the room, all they saw was the normal, expected background noise of Russian television. The bug was practically invisible.
The United States only discovered this catastrophic breach in 1983, and it wasn't through their own counterintelligence brilliance. They only found out because a friendly Allied government tipped them off that they had found a similar device in their own embassy and suggested the Americans check their typewriters.
Wow.
The response to this revelation was handed to Walter Dealey, a senior official at the National Security Agency. And the logistics of his response highlight the sheer, unadulterated panic that gripped the intelligence community.
Dealey looked at the situation and made a horrifying deduction. If the Soviets could flawlessly compromise a typewriter comb support bar, then the Americans could no longer trust a single piece of electronic equipment in the entire embassy.
Not a single thing.
Not a single typewriter, not a teletype machine, not a copier, not a copy maker, nothing that plugs into a wall was safe. The mandate from Dealey was absolute. Replace everything.
It was a logistical nightmare of epic proportions. The NSA was given exactly 100 days to secretly procure, rigorously test, heavily encrypt, and ship 10 tons of secure replacement equipment to Moscow. 10 tons.
10 tons. And they had to do this without alerting the Soviets to the fact that they knew about the bugs. They had to rip out the infected nervous system of the embassy and install a completely new one over a single weekend.
That is insane.
And despite the incredible Herculean success of that specific replacement operation, the entire fiasco was leaked to CBS News in 1985, causing a massive public scandal and deeply infuriating CIA Director William Casey, who felt the leak damaged their ability to study Soviet methods.
But we have to understand that Project Geomenemen, the bugging of the IBM typewriters, was merely a prelude. It was a tactical skirmish compared to the ultimate architectural betrayal that was occurring simultaneously. Because while the Americans were furiously typing on compromised machines, they were also in the process of building a brand new, multi-million-dollar U.S. Embassy office building in Moscow. Construction began in 1979. And this building represents perhaps the greatest, most devastating counterintelligence failure in modern American history. The bilateral agreement for the construction of the new embassy allowed the Soviets to build the structural shell using their own local laborers and their own materials.
I still can't believe they agreed to that.
The State Department agreed to let the Soviets pour the precast concrete columns and floor panels off-site in a Soviet yard, completely away from American supervision or inspection.
I want to push back hard on the decision-making process here. It is difficult to overstate the profound negligence of this agreement. You are building the most secure facility your nation possesses in the heart of your primary geopolitical adversary's capital, and you allow them to construct the physical foundation unmonitored.
But consider the political context of the late 1970s. We were in an era of détente. The State Department was driven by severe budget constraints, and importing American concrete and American laborers was astronomically expensive.
Still, it seems so naive.
They prioritized cost-saving and diplomatic optics over paranoid security protocols. They assumed they could sweep the building once it was finished.
Which is an assumption that displays a catastrophic misunderstanding of Soviet capabilities. By the time the concrete arrived on the embassy site to be assembled by the Soviet workers, the damage was already permanently cast in stone.
Yeah.
You cannot sweep a solid block of concrete for a device that has no power source.
The Soviets didn't just bug the building in a traditional sense. They transformed the physical structure itself into a giant resonant microphone. When American security inspectors eventually realized the depth of the compromise and dramatically halted construction in 1985, they brought in industrial X-rays and took core samples to look inside the concrete pillars.
What did they find?
What they found defied belief. Lengths of steel rebar, the very structural skeleton holding the building up, had been specifically altered, cut to specific lengths, to serve as massive embedded radio antennas.
And the countermeasures the Soviets used to protect these embedded antennas were brilliant. They flooded the concrete mixture with unconnected diodes, metal wrenches, random steel pipes, and aluminum shavings.
This junk.
Yes, junk. They created a dense, chaotic field of metallic debris specifically designed to confuse, scatter, and blind American electronic scanners. If a technician pings a concrete wall with radar and returns 100 different metallic signatures bouncing back at them, it is impossible to isolate the actual functional listening device. The noise conceals the signal perfectly.
They found sophisticated bugs located precisely where massive metal I-beams were welded together, using the beams themselves as conductive pathways. They found a complex, highly advanced power source buried deep within a structural wall that American engineers darkly dubbed the Batwing.
The Batwing.
The entire geometry of the building was designed to capture the microscopic acoustic vibrations of American voices, channel them through the steel skeleton, and transmit them to a nearby Soviet house of worship, which American engineers sardonically nicknamed the Church of Holy Telemetry.
And in a final, almost theatrical display of absolute contempt, the Soviet bricklayers arranged slightly darker colored bricks on the exterior facade of the building. When viewed from a distance, the subtle change in the brickwork spelled out CCCP, the Cyrillic initials for the Soviet Union.
They signed their work.
They did. It was a permanent structural middle finger to American counterintelligence, built right into the walls for everyone to see.
The building became a haunted house. It sat half-finished, exposed to the harsh Russian winters, and entirely empty for years. A colossal brick monument to paranoia. The tension finally broke in a truly surreal cinematic climax in December of 1991.
The end of the Soviet Union.
Right. The Soviet Union is in the final chaotic days of its collapse. The American ambassador at the time, Robert Strauss, pays a visit to the newly appointed KGB chief, Vadim Bakitin. Strauss thinks it's a routine, formal courtesy call during a period of transition.
Instead, Bakitin opens a safe, pulls out a thick file in a heavy valise, and slides them across the desk to Strauss. Inside are the exact, detailed blueprints, the wiring diagrams, and physical examples of the listening devices used to bug the new embassy.
He just handed them over.
After years of absolute stone-faced denial, the head of the KGB simply hands the entire operational architecture over to the Americans, supposedly as a gesture of goodwill with no strings attached.
Strauss was utterly dumbstruck. He couldn't believe what he was looking at. Bakitin expressed a hope that with these plans, the U.S. could finally find all the bugs, finish the building, and move in, symbolizing a new era of transparency.
But the psychological damage was permanent.
The trust was entirely gone. Strauss told him plainly that even possessing the blueprints, the Americans would always, forever believe that the KGB kept a fraction of the bugs a secret. The building was irreparably spiritually tainted.
So what did they do?
Ultimately, Congress approved a drastic measure known as Project Top Hat. The United States literally decapitated the building, demolishing the top floors down to the sixth-floor concrete slab. They rebuilt the secure upper floors using exclusively American workers with top-secret clearances and American materials shipped under armed guard. The embassy finally opened in the year 2000, an astonishing 21 years after construction began.
Which brings us to the grand synthesis of everything we have unpacked today. When we step back and examine the long arc of these events, from a wooden plaque to a cyborg cat, from satellites to typewriters and concrete walls, we are forced to fundamentally redefine our understanding of the Cold War.
It changes everything.
We are taught that it was merely a standoff of nuclear arsenals, a tense game of political chess played with intercontinental ballistic missiles. But the reality is that it was a desperate, invisible, and total war for information.
It was a war that completely erased the boundaries between disparate scientific disciplines and the natural world. The lines dividing biology, architecture, and advanced physics simply ceased to exist.
That's right.
From the passive, resonating wood of the Great Seal to the surgically altered, living tissue of an acoustic kitty. From the intricate kinetic mechanics of an IBM typewriter generating magnetic pulses to the cold, frictionless vacuum of geosynchronous orbit. Every single domain of human existence was weaponized. Everything was evaluated solely on its potential to either hide a secret or extract one.
The paranoia was absolute, because the vulnerability was absolute. If a beautifully carved piece of wood can listen to your deepest secrets, if a pet wandering in the park can transmit your conversation, if the steel rebar buried in your ceiling is broadcasting your whispers, then the very concept of a sanctuary is an illusion.
It is terrifying.
The immense lengths to which these global superpowers went, the hundreds of millions of dollars spent, and the ethical boundaries gleefully crossed demonstrate a chilling truth. In the pursuit of absolute security, humanity will ultimately violate the sanctity of everything in its environment.
And that leads us to a final provocative thought. We look back at Acoustic Kitty or the Bug typewriters or the Great Seal, and it is so easy to view them as relics of a paranoid bygone past.
Just history.
Right. We view them as the extreme, absurd actions of secret intelligence agencies locked in a shadow war that ended decades ago. But look around your room again. Consider the architecture of the modern world. We willingly surround ourselves with smart speakers that sit on our counters, always listening for a wake word.
It's true.
We install internet-connected cameras inside our own hallways and doorbells. We carry rectangular devices in our pockets that track our every physical movement, our heart rate, our private conversations, and our exact GPS coordinates.
The terrifying realization is not that the intelligence agencies of the Cold War failed to create the perfect, omnipresent panopticon. The truly terrifying realization is that the ultimate dream of both American and Soviet espionage, a world where every physical space is monitored, where every object is transmitting data, where the walls are truly, literally listening, was not imposed upon us by secret agents in the dead of night.
No, it wasn't.
It is a surveillance state that we voluntarily purchased, happily unpacked, and connected to the Wi-Fi in our own living rooms.
We want to deeply thank you for dedicating your time to this extensive exploration today. We hope it has profoundly altered how you view the physical objects and the world around you. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to support these continued investigations.
Check the description below for reference links and more information on the sources we utilize today.
Until next time, keep elevating your mind.
ALEATORY podcast.